The council chamber was an amphitheatre of power, a grand structure floating in the void, its towering pillars and holographic banners displaying the insignias of the great civilizations that ruled the known galaxy. The Zerithian Imperium, the Vokthal Dominion, the Karashi hierarchy, ancient mighty empires that had shaped the course of history for millennia. These were the voices that carried weight, that dictated policy, that decided the fate of entire worlds. And then there was Earth, a young species barely past its infancy in the eyes of the elder races. They had clawed their way to the stars through war, hardship, and relentless ingenuity, but to the Council they were little more than a novelty, an eager student in a classroom filled with prodigies. The council chambers were a place of fierce debate, where planetary disputes were settled, where laws were enacted, and where the balance of galactic power was upheld. Humanity had always believed in the council's ideals. They followed its laws, adhered to its trade regulations, and honored its treaties. And yet they remained invisible. When humans spoke, their words were heard but never truly listened to. When they proposed solutions, they were acknowledged but never implemented. When they sought allies, they were offered smiles but never trust. The other species saw them as useful at times, amusing at others, but never equals. Still, humanity persevered. They built trade networks, sent diplomats to every known world, offered aid in crises, and even fought alongside the Council's armies in conflicts that had nothing to do with Earth. Each time, they hoped to prove their worth. Each time, they believed that they were finally being accepted. But acceptance never came. It was an unspoken rule. Humanity was a member of the Council, but not part of it. Like a child sitting among scholars, they were indulged, tolerated, and occasionally praised, but never respected. And so they continued to play their role, hoping that one day their voice would carry weight. That one day, when it truly mattered, the Council would stand beside them. They were wrong. Gwen Carter was 12 years old. She had always dreamed of seeing the stars. Born on Eos Prime, she had grown up watching the shimmering lights of distant nebula through the reinforced glass of her family's habitat module. She had spent countless hours reading about alien worlds, memorizing the names of distant civilizations, and begging her parents to let her visit one of the core worlds. So when her school arranged a field trip to Varlos, a Karashi home planet known for its breathtaking crystalline forests, one of the oldest civilizations, she could barely contain her excitement. She had packed her bag 3 days in advance, pestering her mother to make sure she had everything she needed: her notepad, her camera, her Lucky Charm bracelet. She was ready. Her parents were happy for her, proud of her excitement, of her curiosity. They watched her leave with a smile, never imagining that it would be the last time they saw her alive. The trip was supposed to be safe. The students were under strict supervision, their routes pre-approved by Karashi authorities. There was nothing to fear, until Gwen took one step too far. No one knew the exact details. There were no warnings, no barriers, no signs. One moment, Gwen was walking with her classmates, marveling at the glittering trees of Varlos, the way the light refracted through their crystalline branches, casting dazzling patterns on the ground. Entranced by the beauty around her, she veered off, barely realizing she had strayed from the group. She didn't even know she had stepped onto what the Karashi called sacred ground. But the Karashi did. The response was immediate. Karashi enforcers, tall, grey-skinned humanoids with large black eyes and unreadable expressions, descended upon her in an instant. She was taken. Not to a holding cell, not to an embassy, but to trial. A trial that lasted less than a day. Her teachers pleaded for leniency. They pointed out that no warnings had been given, that there were no barriers preventing her from stepping onto the so-called sacred ground. One of them, his voice shaking, demanded to know why no Karashi had been stationed to stop an outsider from accidentally trespassing. The Karashi judge barely reacted. His cold, unblinking gaze swept over the gathered humans, his expression carved from stone. "Our laws are sacred," he said. "Your people were instructed to follow them. We cannot be blamed for your ignorance." Then his tone sharpened, a flicker of disdain breaking through his detached demeanor. "And you dare point fingers at us? You would do well to thank our laws, for they do not hold you accountable for your own failure to supervise your young. Were it otherwise, you might not be standing here to protest at all. It was clear from the moment it began that this was not a trial. It was a formality. The verdict had already been decided. Gwen Carter was found guilty of trespassing on sacred ground, and before Earth's ambassador could even plead her case or even be informed, the sentence was carried out. Gwen Carter, a 12-year-old girl who had dreamed of seeing the galaxy, was executed. Her parents did not receive a message. No warning, no apology. They were waiting for her to come home, already planning to listen to her stories, to see the wonder in her eyes as she described the alien world she had visited. Their happiness shattered the moment they heard the news. Her mother collapsed, her body racked with silent screams, clutching at the empty space where her daughter should have been. Her father, a man who had always believed in the promise of the stars, stood frozen, unable to process the truth. Their little girl had left for a school trip, and she had never come back. Grief turned to rage. The people of humanity's worlds demanded answers. They demanded justice. The Karashi did not care. She violated our sacred laws was the only response they gave. The punishment was carried out accordingly. To them, the matter was settled. Their laws were absolute, and no outsider, especially not one from an insignificant species, was exempt. If it had been a member of a more powerful civilization, they might have taken a different approach. But humans? The Karashi did not see them as worthy of diplomatic courtesies. Humanity turned to the Galactic Council, the great assembly that had promised peace and justice among the stars. Earth's ambassadors stood before the council chamber, their voices shaking with sorrow and fury. "She was a child," they cried. "She had no warning, no trial." The Karashi High Judge tilted his head, his gaze devoid of emotion. "Ignorance of the law does not excuse the crime," he said. "Our laws make no distinction between child and adult. The sacred must be upheld, no matter who trespasses." A murmur ran through the chamber, but no one spoke in humanity's defense. No condemnation, no outrage. One by one, the council representatives averted their gaze. The Zerithians, the Vokthal, the countless other species who had once called humans their friends, none of them stepped forward. In the end, the council president gave the final ruling. A law was broken. The punishment was carried out. The council has no authority over how a sovereign species enforces its laws within its own territory, especially regarding matters of cultural and religious significance. There is nothing more to discuss. And just like that, it was over. Gwen Carter was gone. The council had moved on, but humanity could not move on. They marched. They protested. Across the many human colonies and embassies, they gathered in the streets, their voices rising in grief and fury. They carried holograms of Gwen's face, of a child who had loved the stars and had been killed for a mistake. The rallies spread to alien worlds. They demanded the council reconsider, that the Karashi acknowledge their cruelty, that the council stand for justice. But the council chambers remained silent. The Karashi delegation dismissed the protests as emotional outbursts of an immature race. And the council? They agreed. It is time to move on, they told humanity. The past cannot be changed. Let it go. Enough with these useless protests. Do not escalate this further. Earth's ambassadors stood in the center of the chamber, their faces etched with grief and fury. But their voices did not waver as they made their demand. We are not asking for a war. We are asking for justice. The Karashi must admit they were wrong. Their laws must be changed so that outsiders cannot be executed without warning, and an apology must be made to the family of Gwen Carter and to the people of Earth. The council chamber was silent. "We will give you 6 months to act. If nothing is done, we will do it ourselves." The council chamber remained still for only a moment after the human ultimatum was spoken. Then a slow, clicking sound echoed through the vast hall. Laughter. The Karashi delegation, seated at their long, elevated table, regarded the human ambassadors with what could only be described as amusement. Their leader, High Judge Veraktor, leaned forward, his expression unreadable but his tone dripping with condescension. "You misunderstand the nature of our laws, humans," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "They are not guidelines. They are absolute, sacred, immutable. They have stood for thousands of cycles, unchallenged, unwavering. They will not be bent, certainly not for you." A ripple of quiet murmurs spread through the gathered representatives of other species. but no one dared interrupt. Veraktor's black pupilless eyes gleamed as he continued. In fact, it is you who should apologize. Your child defiled that which is most holy. Your teachers failed to prevent her from doing so. Your people failed to teach respect for what they do not understand. And yet you demand that we change, that we dishonor our ancestors, our traditions, just to ease your fragile emotions? He leaned back, his expression turning into something close to a sneer. No, it is humanity that should ask for forgiveness. It is humanity that should beg to be spared further punishment for its ignorance. A few members of the council nodded in cautious agreement, unwilling to openly support the Karashi, but equally unwilling to challenge them. The human delegation did not react with anger, did not shout, did not argue. Instead, their leader, Ambassador Ryan Hale, simply stared at the Karashi in silence for a long, heavy moment. Then he spoke, not to the Karashi, but to the council as a whole. 6 months. His voice was steady, firm, unshaken. That is the time you have to prove that justice exists within this council. If nothing is done, if the Karashi face no consequences. His voice was calm, deliberate, yet it carried the weight of something inevitable, something unstoppable. Then we will burn the very ground where they executed our child. Without another word, the humans turned and left the chamber. For a moment there was silence. Then one of the younger Karashi scoffed. Do they truly think they can threaten us? Veraktor let out a low, amused hum. Let them have their tantrum. In 6 months they will realize how powerless they truly are. The council, for the most part, seemed to agree. After all, what could humanity possibly do? Humans, they went silent. Not a word. No further protests. No further demands. In the first few weeks following their departure, there had been murmurs, small, inconsequential whispers in the halls of power. A few species had quietly questioned the Karashi's handling of the situation, though never loudly enough to challenge them. Others had merely noted humanity's absence in passing, a curiosity more than a concern. But as months passed, even those whispers faded. Over the next few months, the halls of the Galactic Council were quieter than they had ever been. Not because of any great war or crisis, no, such events were common in the vast expanse of space, but because a single voice, one that had once been eager and persistent, had vanished entirely. Humanity was gone. Not in the literal sense. Their planets still existed, their stations remained in place, and their ships still floated in the void. But their presence within the council had become an echo of the past. They no longer sent ambassadors to the Great Chamber. Their representative seats, once filled with hopeful voices pushing for cooperation, remained empty. They no longer engaged in trade negotiations. Where once humanity had built vast networks of commerce, fostering connections across the stars, now those channels had gone cold. They no longer offered aid. The species that had once rushed to the aid of disaster-stricken worlds, the species that had sent its doctors, its engineers, its soldiers to protect those in need, simply stopped. It was as if humanity had given up. And the Council, in its arrogance, believed that was exactly the case. They saw it as a childish tantrum, a moment of rebellion from a young, naive species that had been dealt a harsh lesson. They are sulking. The Zerithian Primarch had once chuckled, like a hatchling refusing to eat because its parent scolded it. The others agreed. Humanity was grieving, yes, but eventually they would return, humbled, compliant. They would recognize that the universe did not bend to their will, that they had no true power to change the laws of the stars. They would learn their place. And so, the council carried on. Decisions were made without human input. Trade flourished without human goods. Wars were fought without human intervention. The silence stretched from weeks to months. And the council forgot. They forgot the desperate pleas in the chamber. They forgot the agony in the voices of those who had begged for justice. They forgot the sorrow and the rage that had burned behind human eyes. But most of all, they forgot one simple truth. Children may sulk. Children may grieve. Children may fall silent. But the council were no parents. And humanity was no child. And then the deadline came. The humans had given the council 6 months to correct the injustice. 6 months to demand accountability from the Karashi. 6 months to prove that the council was not a mockery of the very ideals it claimed to uphold. But when the 6-month mark arrived, nothing happened. No message, No retaliation. Humanity remained absent. The Karashi were triumphant. By the 7th month, the Karashi had grown bold in their mockery. The towering, grey-skinned Karashi High Judge Veraktor stood, stretching his long arms in a show of lazy disinterest. His voice, cold and smooth, carried easily across the chamber. "Has anyone heard from the humans?" he asked, his lip curling in amusement. "Or have they finally realized their own insignificance?" A few of his subordinates chuckled. Veraktor continued, addressing the entire assembly now. "I must say I expected more of a reaction. A few blusterous threats, perhaps, a feeble attempt at sabotage. But instead, he made a dramatic gesture as if searching for something unseen. Nothing. Silence. They mope like children denied a toy, hoping their absence will be felt. But tell me, does anyone here truly miss them?" Scattered laughter echoed through the chamber. Some delegates chuckled openly, eager to align themselves with the Karashi's confidence. Others smirked but remained silent, unwilling to voice their agreement aloud. Yet, amidst the amusement, there were those who did not laugh. Some exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions carefully neutral. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats, hands clasped before them in contemplation. They had not forgotten the human ultimatum, nor did they share the Karashi's certainty that nothing would come of it. Still, no one spoke against Veraktor. The chamber, despite its murmurs and low laughter, did not erupt in debate. The humans were absent. The galaxy moved on. And just like that, the session continued. Humanity had disappeared, and the stars remained silent. The Karashi capital, a gleaming metropolis of towering silver spires and endless sky bridges, bustled with its usual arrogance. Its people, draped in flowing robes of status and prestige, moved with the certainty of a species that had never known true fear. They conducted their business, debated matters of power, and indulged in the grand self-importance that came with ruling an empire. This was not just any city, it was the heart of Karashi power, the seat of the wealthiest, the most influential, the untouchable. Here, the rulers of empires, the architects of galactic policies, and the greatest minds of the Karashi dominion resided. From these spires, laws were written, wars were planned, and judgments were passed without a second thought. It was a city that had never known defeat, never feared reprisal. Life moved as it always had, unshaken, untouched. The streets hummed with the rhythms of daily existence, merchants haggled, scholars debated, officials schemed. No one spoke of the human child who had been executed on this very day. No one cared to remember her name. To the Karashi, it was a matter settled, a moment of no consequence, a forgotten footnote in the endless annals of their dominion. Then the sky darkened. At first it was a curiosity, a shadow, vast and unmoving, blocking out the sun. Some glanced up, expecting to see a trade barge or perhaps a diplomatic envoy arriving unannounced. But then the whispers began, unease creeping through the city like a slow-moving plague. The shadow did not pass. It grew, and then the alarms began to scream. Hanging above the city was a fleet unlike anything the Karashi had ever seen. Ships of cold, black metal, void of markings, their surfaces absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. They were not the sleek, elegant vessels of the core worlds, nor the cumbersome behemoths of the warlike Zerithians. These ships were something else entirely. At the center of the formation loomed a single, terrifying colossus. It dwarfed the others, a leviathan of unbroken black, its form jagged and angular like a predator poised to strike. No glowing insignias, no open transmission signals, no demands. It simply hung there, silent, its mere presence suffocating. It radiated an aura of cold calculation, something built not for war but for annihilation. The Karashi defense grid activated automatically. Orbital sentinels swiveled into position, planetary shields flickered online, and squadrons of fighter craft scrambled from their launch bays. The city's ruling caste, watching from their crystalline towers, spoke in hushed, hurried tones. Officials scrambled to contact planetary defense, to hail the intruders, to demand an explanation. They received none. The Karashi stood frozen in place, their large black eyes staring upward in disbelief. Their senses, so attuned to the predictable rhythm of their world, struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. A fleet, an entire fleet, hanging in their sky, dark and vast, swallowing the light of their twin suns. Then came the panic. How had an armada of this size arrived undetected? Their long-range scanners, their deep space observation networks, their early warning systems, none had given so much as a whisper of an approaching fleet. Not a single Karashi vessel had reported an anomaly. No hyperspace lanes had been disturbed. No gravitational signatures had been detected. Their defenses, lauded as some of the most advanced in the galaxy, had been utterly bypassed. It was impossible. The first response was disbelief. This had to be some kind of illusion, a trick of the atmosphere, a bizarre celestial event. But the shadows remained. The ships did not flicker or waver. They were real, and they were here. The city descended into chaos. Alarms shrieked across the capital, their piercing wails cutting through the usual hum of everyday life. Citizens scrambled in the streets, their voices rising in frantic confusion. Market stalls were abandoned, transportation grids jammed as crowds surged toward safety, though no one knew where safety could be found. Inside the high command chambers, the ruling caste erupted into frantic debate. Who were they? What unknown power had entered their domain? What civilization possessed the capability to slip past their defenses unseen? This was not the Council. This was not some familiar enemy seeking territorial gains. This was something else, something they did not understand. And for the first time in their long, unchallenged history, the Karashi knew fear. Then, a message cut through the chaos. A transmission, strong and clear, overriding Karashi communications across the planet. It came not from the Council, not from some unknown race lurking in the dark fringes of the galaxy, but from the very species they had dismissed as insignificant. Your 6 months are up. The blood of a child stains your hands. You denied us justice. Now we take it for ourselves. The moment that word registered, there was a pause, a brief, uncertain hesitation in the panic. Humans? For a moment, the fear that had gripped the Karashi softened into something else. Not relief, but familiarity. These were not unknown beings from the abyss. They were just humans. The same species they had scorned, the same species that had left the Council like a sulking child. And now, here they were, flaunting a fleet over the capital? The hesitation turned to anger. The High Command, now gathered in the central war chamber, seethed at the audacity. How dare humans arrive like this, in force, in the heart of Karashi space? How dare they try to intimidate the oldest military civilization in the sector? You insects dare to flaunt your fleet above our skies? You dare threaten the might of the Karashi Dominion? The Grand Strategos, a Karashi who had overseen countless military campaigns, scoffed at the transmission. Humans had no right to such power, and so without debate, without hesitation, without even responding, he gave the order. Fire the Sun Cleaver! Across the capital, the Karashi planetary defense grid roared to life. At the heart of their military arsenal stood the pride of the Karashi. The Sun Cleaver, a planetary defense cannon so powerful that no warship had ever survived a direct hit. Towering over the capital, its gleaming barrel shimmered with gathered energy, a technological marvel refined over millennia of warfare. It was no ordinary weapon. The Sun Cleaver harnessed raw stellar plasma, siphoning energy directly from the planet's core and condensing it into an unstoppable lance of destruction. It was the ultimate symbol of Karashi military might, a deterrent that had long ensured their dominance in the region. Now it was turned on the human fleet. The Sun Cleaver roared to life, its colossal plasma cannon igniting with the blinding fury of a newborn star. The ground trembled as the weapon fired. The very air in the Karashi war chamber vibrated as energy surged through the weapon's conduits, building to a devastating crescendo. The sheer heat of its passage ignited the sky, turning clouds to vapor in an instant. Shock waves rippled across the city, shattering windows, toppling smaller structures, and sending civilians sprawling. Across the planet, civilians looked up in awe and grim satisfaction. This was the pride of the Dominion, the hammer that had shattered fleets, the fire that had reduced rebellious worlds to cinders. A spear of incandescent destruction erupted from the weapon's maw, a searing column of white-hot plasma surging toward the largest of the human ships. It cut through the sky like divine judgment, a force that no known shield or armor could withstand. No enemy had ever dared provoke its wrath and survived. Then the impossible happened. The plasma bolt struck the ship's surface and did nothing. There was no explosion, No eruption of molten debris, no sign of damage at all. Instead, the energy rippled across the black, cold hull like water breaking against an unshakable rock. For a brief moment, an eerie shimmer spread across the ship's exterior, bending the light in ways that defied explanation. Then the plasma bolt recoiled. The energy that should have consumed the ship in a hellish inferno simply reflected back, dispersing harmlessly into the upper atmosphere. The clouds above burned away in an instant, the sky briefly flashing white before fading back to its unnatural, oppressive stillness. The war chamber descended into stunned silence. The Karashi officers stared at their monitors in disbelief, their mandibles twitching, their eyes darting between the ship and the cannon's readings. "That's impossible," one of them whispered. Another officer checked the weapon's diagnostics, recalibrated, rechecked. The shot connected. The shot should have worked. The Grand Strategos' claws clenched against the armrest of his command chair. His eyes remained locked on the unscathed behemoth in the sky. For the first time in Karashi history, their greatest weapon had failed. The silence that followed was suffocating. The Karashi command room was frozen, every officer locked in disbelief, staring at the untouched behemoth looming over their world. The Sun Cleaver, the pride of their armada, had failed. Then a voice came through the comms. Cold, unforgiving. "Our turn." A deep hum reverberated through the sky. The colossal ship at the center of the human fleet, an obsidian monolith of terrifying precision, began to shift. Along its length, unseen mechanisms roared to life. Power surged, crackling arcs of energy slithering across the ship's surface like living tendrils of light. Within the ship's core, something ancient awakened. The hum deepened into a resonant thrum, a sound that rattled the very bones of those who heard it. Across the Karashi homeworld, seismic sensors blared as the energy signature spiked. An impossible reading, off the charts, beyond anything ever recorded. The command room erupted into chaos. What is that power source?" One officer stammered, his mandibles twitching in fear. It's not nuclear, it's not plasma, it's something else," another screamed, desperately scanning the data. The Grand Strategos lurched forward, his voice sharp with panic. "Maximum power to the planetary shields, now!" The capital's defense grid surged, straining as the power levels spiked beyond their designed limits. The vast iridescent dome covering the city thickened, its shimmering surface pulsing violently as the generators overloaded to reinforce it. What had once been a defensive barrier now burned with desperate intensity, a final wall between the Karashi and annihilation. For centuries, this shield had been the Karashi's ultimate safeguard, an impenetrable barrier that had withstood wars, invasions, and orbital bombardments. But it was not enough. From the human warship's underbelly, a blinding sphere of light formed, pulsing like the heart of a dying star. The air itself seemed to bend around it, distorting reality with sheer, unfathomable power. The hum reached its peak, a deafening crescendo that sent a final terrible shudder through the heavens. Then the weapon fired. A lance of pure devastation descended, a pillar of burning light so vast it seemed to split the sky in two. For a brief second, the shield held. In the command room, a single breath of relief passed through the Karashi officers. Their great barrier had withstood the attack. Their faith in Karashi engineering, so deeply ingrained, allowed hope to flicker in their minds. Then, in the next second, it failed. The shield collapsed, as if a stone had been hurled through glass. It did not buckle or wane. It simply ceased to exist. The once impenetrable barrier shattered, vanishing in a rain of flickering energy fragments. Whatever force had been holding back the human weapon was swept aside like it had never mattered at all. And then the beam struck the Karashi capital with the fury of a vengeful god. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then the world shattered. The ground beneath the capital liquefied instantly, turned to bubbling, molten glass. Entire districts vanished in an instant, reduced to unrecognizable slag. The air itself ignited, a shockwave of superheated plasma consuming everything in a 25-mile radius. Skyscrapers, monuments, the grand halls of Karashi rule, all were erased from existence, vaporized before a single scream could escape. The capital city of the Karashi Dominion was gone. So was its leadership. Not a single officer moved. Not a single breath was taken. The only sound was the crackling of dying holo displays, the war maps now meaningless, coated in a thin layer of dust shaken loose by the tremor of annihilation. Grand Strategos, Vokan stood motionless, his grey skin pale under the cold glow of emergency lights. His mandibles twitched, but no words came. His large black eyes, once sharp with confidence, now stared in empty horror at the screen before him. It displayed nothing but static where their capital had been, a 25-mile radius erased in the blink of an eye. His capital, gone. His leaders, gone. His world, forever changed. The officers around him trembled, their rigid discipline shattered. Some stood with hands over their mouths, others clutched the edges of their stations as though reality itself was slipping away. A junior officer fell to his knees, unable to stop the involuntary tremor overtaking his limbs. Another slumped against a console, staring blankly at the screen, his breathing shallow and uneven. It's not possible," someone whispered. This can't be real." A hollow, guttural noise filled the room, a sound none of them had ever heard before. The communications officer, an old veteran who had served through 3 wars, let out a choking gasp, his voice broken. It took the others a moment to realize he was laughing, a hysterical, empty laugh. "We fired first." His voice was barely above a whisper. "We fired first, and it did nothing. Nothing." The room felt suffocating. The air, once charged with the pride and power of the Karashi war machine, now felt thin, drained of all certainty. Vokan's hands clenched into trembling fists. His mind raced, struggling to grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. How had they miscalculated so badly? The humans were insignificant. Their ships were nothing compared to the great fleets of the Dominion. Their technology was outdated, primitive. And yet the capital was gone. Their most powerful planetary defenses had meant nothing. The humans had not just retaliated. They had demonstrated something worse than mere strength. They had demonstrated control. Vokan swallowed hard, his throat dry. His voice, when it finally came, was hoarse. "Get me fleet command," he ordered. His voice shook, but he forced himself to sound steady. We need to retaliate. We need to—" But he stopped mid-sentence, because the hollow screens flickered back to life, and the human fleet was still there, untouched, waiting. A dreadful silence hung over the Karashi command room. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. The human fleet remained in the skies above their homeworld, dark and motionless, like an executioner waiting for the final word. Grand Strategos Vokan's hands trembled. His mind screamed at him to act, to do something. Retaliate, regroup, anything. But what was left to command? The capital was gone. The leadership was gone. The fleet, the pride of the Karashi Dominion, had been powerless. Their might meant nothing. Their weapons meant nothing. They had never faced power like this before. A crackling voice interrupted the silence, coming through the comms like a whisper from the abyss. The human commander spoke, his voice cold, emotionless, final. "Surrender. Now." Vokan's breath caught in his throat. There was no anger in that voice, no gloating, no threats, only the weight of inevitability. The bridge officers turned to him, waiting, pleading with their eyes for him to say something, anything, but there was nothing to say. He swallowed the lump in his throat, his pride, his arrogance, his fear. With a shaking hand, he pressed the control panel. His voice barely rose above a whisper. We surrender." In a single day, the mightiest power of the Galactic Council had fallen. The surrender of the Karashi Dominion spread like wildfire across the stars. Every network, every news feed, every diplomatic channel repeated the same words over and over again. The Karashi have surrendered to humanity. For centuries, the Karashi had stood unchallenged, their military might second to none. They had crushed rebellions, dominated lesser races, and dictated terms to the weak. And now their homeworld burned. The once proud Dominion, feared and respected across the galaxy, had bowed in a single day. Not to an armada of equal standing, not to an alliance of their enemies, but to the humans, to the race they had mocked, to the species they had deemed insignificant. Shockwaves rippled through the Galactic Council. Meetings were called in desperate secrecy. Long-standing allies distanced themselves from the Karashi, as if their disgrace was a plague that could spread. Some spoke in hushed voices of retaliation, but those voices were drowned in fear. Because if humanity could do this to the Karashi, who would be next? For the first time, they understood. The Council had never been dealing with a child. They had been dealing with a species that had learned to play the long game, and now the game was over. Every species in the Council had expected what came next. Occupation, subjugation, the Karashi stripped of power, their planet turned into a human stronghold. But the humans never came to conquer. Days after the destruction of the capital, after the smoke had settled and the molten glass had cooled, a single human ambassador walked into the ruins. Alone. No soldiers, no grand procession. It was as if nothing had happened. He stepped into the remains of the Karashi High Command, where what little leadership remained sat in stunned silence. Their homeworld had been spared. Their people lived. But their capital, once the heart of their empire, was gone. The ambassador spoke, his voice calm, measured. "A few months ago we gave you a choice," he said. "You ignored it, you mocked it, you claimed your laws were absolute, that they could not be changed for humans, and yet here we are." The Karashi stared at him, waiting for the inevitable demand, for planets, for resources, for their race to become servants of the very people they had dismissed. Instead, the ambassador placed a single document on the table. "We're here to help you rebuild." Silence. Not a single Karashi spoke. Not a single alien delegate in the chamber could find their voice. The ambassador continued, "But some things will change. Your laws, the ones that led to the execution of a human child, end today. No more blind punishments. No more executions without warnings. From now on, intent and circumstance will matter. Outsiders will be informed of your sacred sites, not slaughtered for stepping where they didn't know they shouldn't." The Karashi, still reeling from their defeat, barely hesitated. The documents were signed. No protests, no resistance, no mocking laughter. And then, just as quickly as they had arrived, the humans left. No warships remained in Karashi space. No planetary governors were installed. No tributes were demanded. It was as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The grand hall of the Galactic Council was filled with an eerie, uneasy silence. For 7 months, the seat of humanity had remained empty, a stark reminder of their withdrawal, their ultimatum, and the consequences that had followed. But today, as if nothing had happened, the humans returned. The doors to the chamber parted, and the human delegation entered with quiet, deliberate steps. No fanfare, no announcement. They simply walked in and took their usual place, the same seat that had been left vacant for over half a year. The council members shifted uncomfortably. Zerithians averted their gaze. Others stole cautious glances, watching as the humans sat with an air of practiced ease, calm, composed, as if they had never left. But the chamber was not the same. The air itself felt heavier. Every species in attendance had seen what happened to the Karashi capital. They had witnessed in real time the sheer power humanity wielded. The unfiltered raw display of destruction had been etched into their minds. A single command, a single beam of light, and an empire's beating heart had been reduced to molten glass. And yet the humans had not claimed the Karashi homeworld. They had not demanded submission. They had simply returned. The weight of their presence was suffocating. For centuries, the Council had been the highest authority in the galaxy. They had mediated conflicts, dictated laws, and ensured balance among the great powers. But now a new force sat among them, a force that had destroyed a capital in a single strike and then walked into the chamber as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. No one spoke. No one dared to acknowledge the shift in power. The humans merely sat in silence, waiting. And the rest of the galaxy watched, unsure whether to fear or admire the ones who had rewritten the rules of the stars. Once, humans had been eager students in the great galactic order, seeking approval, negotiating carefully, deferring to the long-established powers of the Council. They had fought for recognition, for respect, for a voice among civilizations that viewed them as insignificant. Not anymore. Now, when humanity spoke, the chamber listened. They no longer sought validation. They no longer asked for permission. The same species that had once dismissed them as young and naive now chose their words carefully in their presence. Humanity was no longer a student in the galactic classroom. They were the principal of the school.